Okay, guys. Well, good morning again. Hope everyone's doing well. We have just another minute pretty much until we get started, but I really appreciate you guys being here and sticking with it all semester. We're going to have part one of our review session here and be right with you guys in just a bit. So let everyone get into the stream and then we'll just jump into the study guide. Hey, Zoe, good morning. Sebastian, hey, Sydney, welcome. Sydney couldn't make it today, huh? I guess not. Well, you were there for the lecture. That's the main thing. Brandon, good morning. Okay, then. So it's 10. I'm going to just get things underway here. Let me just start with a couple of, quick basic things. We're all done with all the lectures, so we're done with the, new material, and now it's just down to review for this final exam. Last week, I distributed the final exam study guide on, what was that, May 6th? So I guess Friday or so, or Thursday. But anyway, yeah, you've got access to the study guide. I would ask you right now to go ahead and pull up your copy of it if you haven't got it up already. You'll easily find it in the announcements tab of our Canvas page, or perhaps it's been routed to your email inbox through Outlook for Chapman. But anyway, either way you have it, whether you've already downloaded it, can you please pull it up? And that will be useful because we're going to use this to guide our review sessions. Now, on the study guide that you, I hope, are looking at, you'll see that there's a total of 86 questions. The first half of the questions are on page 1, and those are all from up till the midterm. And then the second half of the questions are all on page 2, and that's all stuff from after the midterm up till the current day. I'm going to select a set of questions from the study guide. When you took the midterm, you were asked to report on 6 out of 10 options. And for this final, you have a lot more time. The midterm, you were only limited to about an hour of, time to do it because it was just a regular class period. But the schedule of final exams here is that you get 2.5 hours. So I'm not going to ask you a lot more questions, but since you have the benefit of additional time, I'm not going to have only 6. I think I'm going with the option of 8. So I'll have you answer 8 questions, and I'll select a question bank of like 11 or 12. So you will have the ability to eliminate some of the responses that show up on the day of test, but you still got to answer 8 of them. So nobody knows which ones that I will select, but I do know that I will select more of the questions from the second half of the list than from the first. So what this means is that although it's a cumulative exam, there will be emphasis on the second half of the more recent material. So if I, let's say, chose to select 12 questions, maybe I would pick 8 or something from the second half of the list, and like 4 or whatever from the first half, or 7 to 5, something like that. But it'll be a more than half, maybe like a 2/3 ratio or so from the second half of the study guide. Anyway, with all that, we can get into this review session here. The way that I do it is the same as we did it with the midterm. And if you remember that, I like it to be student driven. So I prefer for students to try their best to provide the information that would form an adequate response. But I will insert myself as needed to clarify things, to correct any information. If I think we're getting off track, I'll steer us back. But I do want those students here to at least try to meet me halfway with their best attempted responses. And then I'll make sure that we get to the best clear answer that we can whenever we're reporting on any of the topics on the study guide. So with that, I throw it over to you. You have the study guide, and you know the questions that you want a little assistance or detail about. So I would just ask you to direct me towards the questions that you want us to think about, and then I and your other classmates will do our best to go through them. So whenever you've got questions, go ahead, put them in the chat, and we'll go into it. Yes?
We actually start with number
44. Okay, yes. So looking at 44, question was asked by a student here in the room. So I'm going to go into that first, and then Sydney, we can deal with yours, 51. So 44 says, explain Descartes' method of doubt. And what is known for certain, even when the method is being applied, and why? Okay, so let me ask you that. What is Descartes' method of doubt, first of all? Anybody can say. The method of doubt tells us to assume blah, 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 if there's any possibility of blah, 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 but you have to say what I'm trying to indicate here. So what is the method of doubt? Takes a little while, I know, but just go ahead, get to typing. Okay, Sydney, assume to be false anything that could possibly be doubted. That is right. Anything and everything that could possibly even be doubted, let's just go ahead and just assume or even pretend that it's false. And we would do this in order to discover what's certain, which he thinks we need to do to create a foundation for the growing body of human knowledge. So why then, well, let me continue with the question 44. So that's the method of doubt, assume to be false anything that could even possibly be doubted, doing this in order to try and discover what is really certain. And what does he say we do know for certain, even when we're using the method of doubt? So he says there's all kinds of things that can be doubted, but one thing is totally dead certain. Yes? Well, yeah, so, yes. How would you put it exactly? The knowledge that what?
The knowledge that we are aware.
We? You're using the word we, plural.
I just mean we as in like the knowledge that I am aware. I don't know about you guys, but I know that I can feel this, I can smell this.
Well, no. You don't know that because you might be dreaming right now. And if that was true, then this table is not real. It's in a dream. But what you do know is that still, even if the world was fake and it was big, like just a big hoax, you'd still know what? You kind of had it, but now you lost it. That what? Yes, that your consciousness exists. Exactly. So I think, therefore I am, all of that. Since you're thinking, you know you exist, if nothing else, as like a ghost that's dreaming everything, okay? Because maybe even your body is fake. But one thing you know for sure is that you're a mind because you are thinking, okay? So because you're thinking, you know you exist, but the five senses and everything they reveal to you, that could all be false. So everything your eyes see, your ears hear, your nose smells, your ears hear, I said that, your hands touch, all of those things might be just found within a dream. But the dreamer exists nonetheless, the one that's having the dream. So if nothing else was real, at a minimum, you would know that you have a mind that's thinking. That's I think, therefore I am, the famous quote of Descartes. So that's the one and only thing he says that survives the method of doubt, at least at first. By the time his book is over, he says, never mind, there actually is an external world. And yes, it's real and it's not a dream. But, he doesn't say that at the beginning because he wants to build up to it. The one thing he says we can say initially, though, even with the method of doubt, is that you are thinking, and so you know you exist. Do I exist? Well, you can't necessarily know that, but you know you exist because you're the one that's having the thoughts. Okay, good. So, yes?
And you said in the end, he says like we are in a real world.
Yes, but that's part of a different question. But yeah, he does come back to that later when he thinks he's proven God is real and that he's too good to trick you. So that's when he thinks clear and distinct things like the world, they must be real because God wouldn't be playing with you.
But for this question, we only want to focus.
No, yeah. On this question, it's just about what is certain, and that's that the mind of you exists, even if all else is subject to doubt. Okay? Good. So thanks for that one. And then to Sydney, you ask about 51. Soon he'll be in the past. Okay, so David Lewis's article, The Paradoxes of Time Travel. Some people say that time travel is not possible because it involves paradoxes. And one of them is this idea that in time travel scenarios, a person might say something really weird sounding like, hey, in 5 minutes, I'll be in the year 2030, which sounds like a contradiction because how can it be that in 5 minutes you'll be a decade ahead? Or that in 10 minutes you'll be way back in the past? Well, he says this paradox can actually be explained away by introducing two different ways of thinking about time or two different time frames. So tell me that someone will have a memory or notes or both which report on what are the two different types of time that David Lewis discusses here. We have blank time versus the other blank time. So what are these blanks? Two types of time, and then this will help explain the meaning of statements like soon he will be in the past. So there's terminology. You say internal and external, close, Kylie. I kind of like the way of wording it, but the author's wording was personal and external. Right. So personal and external time. Who can tell me the definition of both, or one at least? Terms defined in the author's book. Not to worry, Kylie. It's a subtle difference, but honestly, I almost feel like internal is a better term. But anyway, in keeping with the author's usage, personal and external time. What is personal time? It's a clear, precise definition of that. Personal time. Time. What is personal time? People are citing the terms. I assume you would have written the definitions if you have that. Personal. Time as it is experienced and measured by the individual. Could have said a little more, Cordy, by the time-traveling individual. Okay, so time as it is measured and experienced by the individual traveler as shown on their personal wristwatch, which of course travels with them, so it shares the same state of motion. Okay, so personal time is like time as it is experienced by the one person who's in the time machine or traveling through time. What is external time, though? External time is time as it is experienced and measured by what other things? So we're halfway home. Just got to tell me what is external time.
Other factors outside of the person, right? External factors.
Well, it's time as it is experienced and measured by all the external observers and clocks. That's right. Okay, so Corey, you have the right definition. So now, suppose that I was going to say something like, pretend this is happening, that there's time travel. And suppose I'm about to get into such a machine and that it takes 10 minutes for it to spit me out into another part of time. So, well, 10 minutes of personal time. So I get in there and I say, hey, yo, this is crazy. In 10 minutes, I'm going to be in the year 2030. Because I'm going to zoom ahead 9 years into the future. It sounds like it's impossible because the person's saying in 10 minutes, I'll be 9 years ahead. But now with these two different types of time being mentioned, we can actually explain this. So tell me how to interpret that statement using personal and external time. So like it means that in 10 minutes of what kind of time? I will be 9 years ahead in what other kind of time? Just write it out and give us that complete sentence. To say that in 10 minutes I'll be a decade ahead means that in 10 minutes of which type of time? You have two things.
Personal.
Yes. So my personal experience is like 10 minutes will pass on my watch. But when I get out of the machine, it's like all the newspapers say 2030. And so we don't read newspapers that much, but like the dates and stuff on people's cell phones, they all say 2030, whatever. So 10 minutes of personal time as opposed to 10 years of external time. This is not a contradiction at all, actually, because an implication of the space-time theory of relativity is that we do actually occupy our own individual personal time frames. It's just that they all coincide because we don't have the technology or the velocity that could make time dilation a measurable phenomenon that's anything other than infinitesimal. So there's no paradox. To say that soon he will be in the past is like saying soon in his personal time he will be minus 50 years or something in external time. If I was going to jump in a time machine today and say to you, this is crazy because in 15 minutes I'm going to be back watching the Beatles live in 1966. That would be like saying in 15 minutes of my personal time, I'll be 55 years minus in external time. Okay, so that's the idea of that possible question. So let's keep going. No time to waste. Let's say, what's next? What do you want to do next?
Nobody writes anything. We do 54.
54. Let me see. Yeah, okay. So student here is asking about 54. Let's talk about that. So what is a temporal part of an object? According to the discussion given by Ted Sider and others. Yes?
The one about the grandfather.
You said 54?
Yeah, not 53.
Well,
Oh, sorry. For some reason on mine, it's explain the grandfather paradox.
Is that right? Hey, so to students watching this, can anybody please tell me what number is number 54? Because it seems there's a discrepancy between what I have and what a student is asking me about. What question is question 54? Because you need to have your numbering aligned with everyone else's. Otherwise, there will be a mismatch. 54, explain the idea that people have temporal parts. So something's wrong with your list.
That one's 53 for me. I probably have one.
You must have erased a question. Okay, 54 is temporal parts. There's a student in the class, when I started answering that, said, no, I'm talking about the other one about how many people are having a conversation on the phone, but that's 53. What is your 53? What is your 53?
My 53 is temporal parts.
Okay, what is your 52?
If the person talks to their past self.
Hmm.
And then 51 is,
Did you transfer your document to Google Docs or something?
I did, yeah.
Okay, so I think you may have messed up your numbering. That's what another student here in the chat has said.
Okay.
Anyway, make sure to renumber it so that it corresponds accurately with our proper list. But anyway, you want to talk about the question which is numbered in the official list, 53. You're asking about grandfather paradox.
Yes.
Okay, grandfather paradox is 55. Okay, so that's the one you want. Am I right?
Yes.
Okay, good, thanks. Okay, so let us speak about, I guess, the grandfather paradox, even though all the questions need attention. But so our student's request is to discuss the question of explain the grandfather paradox. So let's go back then to David Lewis. David Lewis's article, The Paradoxes of Time Travel, involves one scenario where a person wants to go back to the past to kill their own grandfather. Now, it seems to some people that there's a little bit of a paradox involved in the scenario because according to one way of looking at it, it seems like he should not be able to logically succeed in the assassination effort. But another way of looking at it makes it seem like he can. Can anybody tell me why it might appear to be logically contradictory for the Tim to go back to the past and kill his grandfather at a date and time before the grandfather ever conceives Tim's parent? Why would that be, according to some intuitions, common sense, not possible? Let me know. Why would some argue that he can't possibly succeed in killing the grandfather back then? Yes, because then he would never have existed, and clearly you must exist if you're able to commit murder. So, it cannot be that this guy, the grandfather, both has grandkids that end up time traveling, but also is killed before that ever happens. So it would not make any sense logically, and it would contradict the timeline of history for this person who has time travel to never have been born in the first place. So that's why it seems not possible. On the other hand, though, some people say, well, if you just look at the fact that he's there in the past, he's pointing a gun at someone, he wants to kill him, why shouldn't he be able to? Now, how does Mr. Lewis resolve the paradox? The paradox being that some people think he can, and other people would say it also seems like he cannot succeed. Well, Lewis says that probably the most logical, coherent answer is that he will fail inevitably, because, as we said, it would be a contradiction in terms of him both having been prevented from birth and also being the successful assassin. So he'll fail, but for an ordinary reason. The last thing that Lewis says is that, in a way, the reason that we feel like he both can and cannot is because the same word can has different senses. He talks about the broad sense of the word can and the narrow sense of the word can. The broad sense of can is like what a person can do given a bigger picture of what factors we consider. The narrow sense of the term can is what a person can do based on a more narrow range of factors about them. So in explaining this to you guys, I asked the question, can you speak Russian? And the most common response that gave first was no. But if I change the wording of the question and say, can you, by comparison to a dog, speak Russian? Now you're thinking, well, yeah, in the big picture, I guess, if I really, really wanted to, I could learn it, unlike a dog that doesn't even have the chance to learn Russian. So when you're looking at yourself in the broadest sense, you'd say, I can. But when you're just narrowing it down to the fact that you haven't studied it yet, you would say, I cannot. Now, in the same sense then, with regard to Tim, when we look at the big picture, given the fact that he was born after all, we'll say, no, he inevitably can't succeed. But when we just look at the small picture and we have tunnel vision just on the fact that he's there with a gun and a motive, then it seems like he can. And I mentioned to you guys that the kind of interesting philosophical depth of this that applies to our own lives is that if the space-time theory of Einstein is true, then we are sort of like Tim ourselves, except it's just that we can't change the present. or the future, because all the moments are fully set out in space-time. So when you think about how you appear to believe that you could do things otherwise, then we look at you in the narrow sense of the word can, and we say you can. But when we consider the big picture of space-time and how all the moments already exist, including the past and future, then in that big picture, broad sense of can, we would say that no, you can't, let's say, have avoided coming to this review session. But anyway, so that's the grandfather paradox. Guy wants to kill his grandfather. Can he? It looks like he both can and can't when you consider these interpretations. The author says that literally he can't because it would be a contradiction. But if you want to play around with the word can and look at it in the broad and the narrow sense, this might give some expression to what people mean when they do discuss him being able to and not able to. And yes, question.
Really quick, I'm a little confused on the broad and narrow. When you're using the example of like speaking Russian, can I speak Russian? No, that's broad, right?
Well, no, you can't speak it in the narrow sense, according to which you've not yet studied it. But don't you understand that in the big picture as a human, you like can just because a human can. But you can't in the narrow sense that you're a human that hasn't studied it yet, right? So if I ask you whether you can speak a language, you could think about, well, currently no, but like in theory, yes. And in theory is like a big picture way of looking at it. And just according to your current skills and talents and abilities now, that's looking at it in the more narrow sense. It's kind of like this, right? I'm a big runner, okay? My best run as a mile is 5:21. And I say to myself, and this is real, I have a goal of getting to 5 minutes. Now, with my current training, I don't think I can. But that's a narrow look. In the big picture, given the fact that I'm a human that can train and work on this over time, I would say I can. Like ultimately, down the line, I can. But right now, I'm not in shape to do it, so I can't. You understand? So it's like looking at just this narrow view of where I'm at right now, I say no. But taking a big picture, long view, I say, yeah, I could. So it's sort of like with Tim. When we just look at the fact that he's there, it seems like he can kill him. But when we take a zoom out to the big picture of history and time, it looks like he'll never be able to because we know he was born. And it's sort of like with you in Russian, right? Looking at you right now, you can't. But if we were to take a bigger picture view of possibility, then I guess in that sense you could. Does that make sense? Okay, good. So, fair enough. Good. Thanks, guys. Let's move to the next. Whatever next question you want to speak on or talk about. Let's go from there. So I guess if you have questions here, Olga, then maybe what you'll do is just say the question's wording instead of the numbering because that will confuse us. Okay. So Sydney, 61, explains supervenience physicalism. Okay. So in Daniel Stoljar's essay, Physicalism, he tries to explain what it means to claim that everything is physical with reference to the concept of supervenience. Supervenience is a concept that is best explained through the example of a dot matrix image or a similar example where you have a pixelated image. So somebody tell to me what is a dot matrix picture or whatever and how it's built and what it's made out of. Dot matrix picture. I mean, I'm assuming some of you guys probably wrote your paper on this topic, so someone will have knowledge of what is a dot matrix image. Cordy, large picture made out of an array of small ordered patterns of ink dots. Yes, that's right. So it's like just a big picture made out of a bunch of little dots on a grid that are assigned different positions and colors. It's not different from an image that's shown on a digital viewing device, like a computer monitor, a cell phone screen, or a TV. Those are formed by the means of pixels. Okay, so like when you're looking at my image right now on your screen, the reason that it's displayed is because instructions are given to the resolution of your device to illuminate the pixels that form the grid of the screen in different given colors and patterns. And so whether you're thinking of a big picture made out of tiny dots of ink in a physical dot matrix image, or you're thinking of a digitized image that's formed by an array of pixels that are illuminated in a given way, the same kind of example is to be considered. Okay, so big picture made out of little dots. Now, suppose that you have two dot matrices that are identical in terms of how each dot is placed and arranged. if you have two that have the same exact arrangement of dots, then they're going to have the same larger scale features too. Now, the terminology that the author uses for these larger scale features is what's called global features. Okay, so a global feature of a dot matrix composite thing is just one of the large scale, big picture aspects of it. So if I was to draw, I don't know, a little image like this, and suppose, let's just pretend this is a real dot matrix picture. Okay, little glare there. Hopefully it's not impossible to make it out, but I'm just telling you this is a day at the beach, right? Or just the ocean. There's waves, there's the sun shining off to the top right corner, and then you see a couple of seagulls or birds flying in the air. Now, if this was my example to you, can you point out one global feature of that dot matrix? A global feature, a large-scale aspect of the composite. So what's one of the things in this image that's formed out of dots, but it's an object? The sun, good. Or one of the birds, or the waves. Okay, good. So those are things that are generated from the little dots put into that order. Okay, very good, guys. Now, if there was a second dot matrix, which was identical in terms of the order and placement of each dot, then can we agree it would have the same global features? Yes, because the global features are simply nothing other than the array of dots being put in that order. So by hypothesis, if you have a second identically arranged set of dots, then it's going to have all the same global features. So in other words, if we have a second one of these to the right and it's the same order and distribution of dots, it's still going to have the birds. It's still going to have the sun. It's still going to have the waves. It'll be a replica, in other words, just a copy. Okay, now, this then is used to explain something about physical reality according to physicalism. In physicalism, the universe is analogous to the dot matrix because our universe is a thing populated with a bunch of objects, but these objects are themselves made by tiny little things, which we would call what? The tiny little bits that make up physical reality. Rather than ink dots or pixels, we could refer to them as what? The tiny little particles that compose all things physically. Word? Physics people? Nobody? The atom, right, the atom. Atoms. Atoms make everything up. According to physicalism, if this whole universe is a physical place, then what that means is everything's made out of atoms. Everything supervenes on the order and the distribution of the atoms. Just like in these dot matrix images, all the large scale aspects of it supervene on the distribution of the little ink dots. So if there was a second physical universe, which was an atomic copy of ours, this is like a corollary to the two compared dot matrices. But if there was a second physical universe, a whole physical system which had the exact same pattern and order of atoms, then what would it be like by comparison to ours? If you're following the analogy, this hypothetical duplicate physical universe would have to have all the same global features as ours. So in the universe we live in, a global feature is like an object. It could be like you, me, this marker, Chapman University, somebody's car, White House, Eiffel Tower. Those are things that are made out of atoms. And if there was a second universe that was a total physical copy of ours, atom for atom, then down to the last detail, it would have everything the same. So not only would it have the same objects, but it would even have, and here's the point, it would even have the same thoughts. It would have a copy of you thinking the same thoughts and having the same feelings because your mind and all your conscious states are none other than the product of these atoms forming them. So that's what physicalism says, and that's how supervenience explains what it means that everything is physical, that everything supervenes on atoms, so much so that if there was a second universe with an atomic identical configuration, then there could not be any difference of consciousness or thought. Okay, so supervenience, dot matrix stuff. You got a big dot matrix made out of little dots. It's kind of like the universe, which is made out of little atoms. And again, side by side, two of them with the same pattern of little pieces is going to have all the same large scale features. So if the parts are the same, then the whole is going to be the same too. All right. So what will be next? Causal closure. Okay, Brandon, 64. So the argument from causal closure. This is an argument which is given to try and support that physicalism is true. It was mentioned by Daniel Stoljar in his essay. The argument contains three premises which lead to the conclusion that the mental states, that mental events just are physical events. But you'll tell me what the different premises are, starting with the first. So it has stuff to do about causation, like everything that has a cause has blah, blah, blah. So go ahead, report on it. Tell me, what are the premises of this argument? And then once we see the full argument stated, we can explain the different premises a little more. What's the first premise of the argument? So when you read the book, attend the class, you take good notes, it's all there. All the information's there. Okay, Sydney. Every event that has a cause has a physical cause, and also same to you, Brandon. Good. That's the correct first premise. What after that? Second premise. So if you know that, then you must be looking at the right notes. So you know the remainder. Every event that has a cause has a physical cause, followed by what? Mental events can cause physical events. Good. Also, the second premise, that's correct. What is the third one? The third one's a little complicated looking at first, but we'll get it in there. So far, we have the first two premises. Every event that has a cause has a physical one, number one. Number two, mental events can cause physical events. What after that? Third premise is key. Okay, so there you go, Sydney. If event A causes B, then there's nothing else, C, that is different from A, which also causes B. And if all three of these premises are the case, then the conclusion that follows is that mental events are physical events. Can someone put that conclusion in the chat? I just asked you to do that because this is a permanent record that people can use to refer to later, and if it's in the chat, then it will be on the record. What's the conclusion? Therefore, mental events are physical events. Okay, good, Brandon. So now, if this question were selected and you were to report on it, the argument, the best answer is not just going to verbatim list the different premises and conclusion, because that takes no thought. A person could just memorize that or have it in their notes and be like, here's what somebody said to write. The perfect answer is one where the student shows nuance and detail by analyzing and reporting on what the premises mean. So let's go into each one. The first premise, every event that has a cause has a physical cause. So this claims that because we're in a physical universe, if anything happens, something physical had to trigger it. Otherwise, it would not have happened. So you know that if something occurs, a physical event led to it. The second premise says that mental events can cause physical events. Now, what does that mean to you? What does it mean that mental events can cause physical events? Or can you give an example or think of something? Tell me about mental events being able to cause physical events. Like, what does that mean? So you see words, but you can't just be like, these are words, I don't know, I got to write them down. You need to know what they mean. So what does it mean that mental events can cause physical events? Just got to say. What does it mean? What's a mental event? Okay, there you go, Brandon. Good. Thoughts lead to action. Cordy, you say I have the mental activity of intending to do something, and then you do it. There you go. Okay, watch. So you see my hand? It's going to snap a finger. Wow, how did that happen? What caused that? Because I thought, let me do it, and then I did it. It's just like me talking to you right now. Like I'm speaking and the words are coming out because I'm thinking about doing it. And it's just like you. You see you typing right there? Why is the typing happening with your hands physically? Because you're thinking I'm going to type. So thought can just lead to your behavior. That's all the second premise is saying. Okay, now the third premise says that if there's a cause for something, it's the only cause. So there's no such thing as two causes for one event. There's just one, exactly one. And if you put these three premises together, they're supposed to imply the conclusion. Here's how. The first premise says whatever happens has a physical cause. The second premise says, well, your mind can cause things to happen physically by moving your body or causing you to take actions. But since everything that has a cause has a physical one, this mind that is causing your behavior must just be the physical brain doing it. So the physical brain is the cause of your observable behavior. And what the third premise is then saying is that since we know the physical brain is the physical cause of your behavior, there's no room for anything else. So it's not like it's the brain, but also the soul, or it's also the spirit within you. It's just your brain. And if you thought there were two causes, that's what the third premise is denying. So there's a physical cause of your behavior, and there's never more than one cause for anything. So to say that there's room for like a non-physical soul or something to be involved in this process is unnecessary and not correct according to the argument. Okay, so that argument tries to show that mental events are just brain activity, because if they weren't, then we would be multiplying more causes than is necessary to explain your behavior. Okay, so let's go from there to whatever's next. We still have some good amount of time, 15 minutes or so. So still amount of time to cover a couple more good questions, whichever ones you want to look at. What's next? I mean, I know it's a little weird, because when you're just doing things, you don't think about there's a cause-effect relation. You're like, it just happens. But I mean, obviously, you have to think sometimes before anything happens. If I want to go for a run, it's not like my body just does it without me knowing what's going on. I make a decision, and then the run happens afterwards. Yes?
Also, I fixed my numbering.
Okay, good.
Mine 71, explain Turing's views on whether machines can think.
Okay, yes, there we go. So Turing's views on whether machines could think. Alan Turing, inventor of the digital computer, makes the argument that machines could think if and when they passed the Turing test. So what is that? It's, yes?
That's not the imitation.
Well, it is, yes. I mean, yes, it is, yes. Why not?
Why is it not?
Why did you think it's not?
Just because I know the imitation game is its own thing,
Mm-hmm.
and I assume that this was just a different way to test.
Well, it's a more formal and a less formal way of referring to the same thing. The imitation game is a game that's played with people who are trying to imitate a different subject and trick someone that's asking questions into giving the wrong answer about who's who. That same style of game is how you play the Turing test, because you have a computer and a human, and the interrogator gets to ask them both questions, but when they're done asking questions, they have to judge which was really a human and which wasn't. And if they get it wrong, and they get it wrong like half the time, Turing says that's when we should look at these as thinking machines that are computers that have consciousness like us. So he believes that it will happen eventually in time. He thought that by the year 2000, we would have machines that were powerful enough to trick the interrogator about 25% of the time. But then he thought that sometime in this 21st century, we would arrive at a point where machines are so powerful and computers are so, AI is so intelligent that you can't tell the difference anymore when you're talking to somebody, if it's a real human or if it's a machine. Can you imagine that? I mean, imagine we get to the point where we have like whole customer service that's all done by robots, but it's no longer the thing where it's like, press 1 and it's a machine. It's just like a realistic human conversation, and you can't tell the difference. They're laughing, making jokes, talking about how they feel today, stuff like that. So if we ever get to that point in time, that's when he says we'll have computers that think, and he says we will get there. So yeah, when they pass the Turing test / imitation game.
Both of these, is it a machine trying to guess who's human?
No, it's a person who's trying to determine whether they're talking to a machine or a person. Okay, so maybe we need to talk about the imitation game. So for question 71, I hope that makes sense. He says that eventually computers will think when they pass the Turing test, but this requires, I think, a little specification of the Turing test itself. So let's go over number, let's see, 68. Suppose that you are establishing the Turing test / imitation game. How does this game play? What are the rules? Who are the players? Tell me how to set it up. We're going to play the imitation game. So set it up and tell me, as though you were actually performing the test.
For the first Turing test that you talked about, there was A, and then B and C, and an interrogation room, or blindfolded, and they're trying to find out who the male or female was.
Right, but forget that version. The one about guessing gender, like that's the sort of warm-up lead into it. Let's talk about the one that's played with a computer and a human. So how's it played?
With like the foreign like the foreign object you drew. There was like a foreign alienish picture you drew in class with the two people, right?
An alien? Whoa, what is going on,
We're
man?
on the right track with the first one. It's like a person will ask questions, and a machine and another person will
Yes,
answer.
sorry, I'm sorry.
You think about the three-headed creature, something completely getting your head mixed
You
up.
got some weird drawings. I'm not-
Okay, yeah, well, it's not relevant. So, okay, anybody in the chat, please tell me how to play the imitation game. This is not that bad. Like, how do you play it? Suppose we're playing this game. Tell me how to play it. You were getting there, but you started talking about a man and a woman guessing the gender of the other person. This is only supposed to support your understanding of the actual game that matters. That one about guessing gender is not important to the question being asked.
Isn't it trying to show those two, the computer's trying to see, the humans are trying to see the computer can answer some certain questions. Like, for example, the thoughts and for example, certain questions that you mentioned.
Yeah, well, let me see what the student here is writing. Sydney, one person is behind a wall, a machine and a person are on the other side. The person behind the wall has to determine which is the person and which is the machine. Okay, correct. They have to ask questions through interviews. So they get two separate interviews with each of the two subjects that are on the other side of the wall. They know that one of them is a human being and that one is a computer, but they don't know which one is which, and they have to just try to determine that based on the answers they get from their questions. So the reason that the interrogator is not allowed to see the two subjects is because they're only supposed to judge based on the content of the answers. And the reason that they don't hear a voice is because they're not supposed to use tone of voice as the way of determining who's who. So after they conduct the two interviews, they simply have to make an assessment. Who was a human and who wasn't? Now, they might get it right or they might get it wrong. If they misidentify about 50% of the time, like they get it wrong who was a human and who wasn't, then that is the standard that Turing thinks will mean computers have consciousness now. When computers cannot be distinguished from humans when you're talking to them. So when we reach a point in time, which Turing thinks inevitably we will, even though we're not there quite yet, when we get to the point where interviews between humans and computers, you can't tell the difference as to which one was which, that's when we will say they're thinking machines. So the imitation game is the way he thinks we would test for the question of whether machines have consciousness. And what passing the test for the machine means is that they're deceiving the interrogator about half the time in a series of trials. So Dennis, you're talking about you ask the computer questions like you already know it's a computer. No, the whole point is, am I talking to a computer or not? Maybe it's a human. I'm going to ask questions and maybe I'll see if their answers sound like robotic answers or do they sound like authentic human-like answers. And I'm going to judge based on which one I thought was which. Okay, so what's next? We got time for maybe one or two more. What do you say? Just let me know whatever you want to go into. Just if you have questions, you should ask those questions. What's up, Sydney 83? Why does Nagel say that death is bad at any age? Okay. So the thing that's bad about death, according to Nagel, is that it deprives a person of the goods of life. On this question, why it's bad at any age, some people say, maybe you've heard this said before, that when a person dies and they're way up in the advanced years, they're 95 years old or something, maybe it's not as tragic as if the person was 25 years old because of all that potential out ahead of the young person as opposed to the older person. But Nagel doesn't really agree with that. He says it's the same tragedy, whether you're 80 or whether you're 8. And the reason is because at any age, even when you're way up in your age, you still want to continue to experience the goods of life. You still want to have the ability to think, to feel, to move, to desire things and get them. So because we remain attached to the goods of life permanently, he thinks that it's a misfortune when you die at any age, because it's not like the old person is less attached to the continued existence than a young person is. That's why he says it's bad at any age, because the goods of life remain something that we want to persist on and continue with. And it's not just young people that care about that, but old people too. So he says it's bad at any age because of the fact that the deprivation and loss of the goods of life is always something that you don't want to happen unless you've become suicidally depressed and you don't want the goods of life yourself. But most people never get there. So it's a bad thing at any age because it would deprive you of the goods of life if it's the final end. Of course, if there's the afterlife, then never mind. No big deal. So what's next? 8?
80.
80, okay. That is global and local desires?
Yes.
Okay, correct. Okay, so think of Derek Parfit and his article that we recently studied, one of the last ones. He says that when you think about desires that people have, right? In other words, things people want. He claims that there's two overall types of desires. And as the question mentions, they're labeled local and global. So someone just tell me if you can remember the definition or examples of local desires versus global desires. What are those things mentioned by Parfit? Like the kind of desire that is a so-called local one versus a global one. And I think I tried to say when I taught it in the first place that his terminology here, it's almost a little misleading because global makes you think of like the international community, but it's not about that. No, it's more about like big picture of you, like your big picture goals kind of thing. But anyway, I don't want to say too much. I got to say less. You guys tell me, what are these two definitions, local and global desires? I know you know it, so it's not a question of that. 100% you know it. Okay, Sydney, local. Desires for particular things that you can fulfill in the short term. Yes, that's right. Then what's global desires? Also good, thank you, Brandon. Desires for specific particular things that you could pretty much get in the short term, in the here and now. On the other hand, global desires, good, Brandon. Those are desires that are about a person's whole life or a large part of it. Now I would ask for this. Can anybody provide examples of each type? Right? Now we have the definitions. That's the first point. Then you would say, here's, for example, one such thing that is a local desire, or one such thing that is a global desire. Okay, so Cordy, your examples are of global. Health, having a family, being wise. Okay, good. Being moral, wise, healthy, having a career and education. Those are global desires because those are things that you can't just like go out and take care of like in a couple hours like you're doing errands. You know, I'm gonna have a nice family and be educated and healthy, and I'll just take care of that before 3 so that I can move on to other things. But local desires are, yeah, little specific particular things. So I want a piece of pizza, maybe there's a shirt that I'm trying to get, maybe there's like some In-N-Out I want for lunch, yeah, or I want to buy a video game that I see, you know, that looks cool and I want to be able to play that. So those are local desires. Global desires are the big picture ones that you carry with you through life, that you hang on to, that you keep working on, and you always keep maintaining. And then local desires are little particular things. Yes.
So would you say that global desires are less objects? They're more like,
Yeah.
I would say a nice house. That would be a local desire.
Right. Well, it will take a long time to get to the financial level to have a house. But sure, yeah. I mean, things, possessions are often, for the most part, the local desires. When you say home, it's one thing that makes me question whether that could almost bleed into a global desire, because for many people having a home is like a lifelong goal, and you know, because of how much they cost a lot of times. But anyway, objects like specific little things, sure.
Specific house.
Well, you keep going with house, but again, like I mentioned, it's not so easy to buy for many people, huh?
I just mean like shelter, building. Let's say you want a house, not a home, you just want a house.
A house, yeah, the house itself. Sure, that could be, I would argue, a local desire.
Oh.
But the distinction that you raise is it's a gray area case. So it's not one of the ones that's like an obvious, like a bag of Cheetos, that's local, you know, like being like a very wise, rational person, this is global. And so I just kind of go with the obvious, like polarized different examples so that we don't have the tough questions like, well, what is a house? Is a house really global or local? It's right on the bubble. But you know what I mean? Okay, so anyway, the last point about this. The author says that if you had to look at which ones matter more, the global ones matter more. And he thinks that it's better for a person to focus on satisfying those global desires than to only be in the pursuit of the local ones, especially if you're going to give up on some of the global ones for the sake of more short-term pleasures. Have you ever heard of a person who's like, you know, education's great and I know it would set me up for a great life, but I just want to party and hang out. I'm going to drop out of school and just travel and have a bunch of fun doing whatever. That person's going for local desires and they're setting back a big picture goal. And this author thinks that that's not actually better for you. So he emphasizes that the global desires have greater importance. The local desires matter, but if they come in the way of your global desires, then you should focus more on the big picture. That's what he thought. Okay, does that make sense? Hopefully so. Okay. We do only have like a minute of time in today's remaining period. So I don't know. I'm looking at the list. I don't know if there's much I can do with 60 seconds. So probably best, since we've covered one last question there with enough, I think, detail. Let's come back on Friday and get in the second part of this review session. I'm also going to, hold office hours on Friday as usual from 11:30 to 12:30. Back when we had face-to-face classes, I will always offer like some bonus office time right before the final. And when it was face-to-face, students would come, a lot of them, to like Starbucks where I would be and try to cram a little bit with my help right before the test. Now that we're all remote, I don't know how many people would want to take up such an option, not to come see me in person, but on a Zoom, like additional office hour. But I'll probably provide it anyway, and if anybody does want to get the benefit of that, they can. So I'll let you know when the exact time slot might be, but it will probably be just in the hours leading up to the date and time of the final. But for now, though, let's adjourn for the moment. Let me know everything's good, and if you say so and say goodbye in the chat, I'll close the stream, and I'll see you guys back on Friday. I'll be done with your essays too this week. I'll be sure to finish them by the end of the weekend, and so you can know your grades once I announce that they're ready in a few days. Okay, thanks, Sebastian, Zoe, everybody else. Really appreciate you guys' attendance and assistance with the meeting today. Take it easy. If you need anything, let me know by email. Otherwise, I'll just see you back on Friday. Okay, then. Bye-bye.